Hi everyone. For some of you it's evening or morning. Welcome to Photoville 2020 and this afternoon's conversation, Asian Americans reflect on seeing themselves, race and the pandemic, hosted by Time Magazine. My name is Laura Romanis and I'm the co-founder and executive director of Photoville. We are a small nonprofit focused on community and education through photographic public art and providing more platforms for visual storytellers. We recently kicked off our 9th annual festival with over 60 exhibitions in Brooklyn, not only displayed in Brooklyn Bridge Park, but in all 5 boroughs of New York City. So from Staten Island, Times Square, the Bronx, Queens, Lower East Side, and Harlem. We decided that just because we couldn't have our beloved shipping containers, it didn't mean we couldn't exhibit for the whole public and make it even more accessible than ever before. We've also taken all of our programs online. This is one of the many talks we'll be presenting this year, and I want to thank our amazing partners at PhotoWings for their continued support of our talks program, in addition to all of our education and community initiatives this year. And also I want to thank the Philip and Edith Leonian Foundation for their support. I really hope you check out our website, photoville.nyc. We have a lot more programming, and we also have a very robust education program starting next week for the month of October. So for those of you who have teenagers in your life, I would highly recommend checking it out. We have peer panels, we also have artist talks, and we also have professional development for educators. I also want to shout out our gratitude to our marquee partners, Brooklyn Bridge Park, NYC Parks, Leica Camera, PhotoWings, the NYC Mayor's Office of Media Entertainment, New York Ferry, and the Dumbo Business Improvement District. Now to Time. For the last 6 months while we've all been sheltering, the work that the visuals team at Time have produced has been incredible. I mean, it's always great, but I think that the work that the photography department have done has been exceptional. And back in June, the feature by Haruka Sakaguchi about the Asian American experience in the time of COVID just floored me. We reached out to Time Photography Department because it never hurts to ask, and they didn't hesitate to work with us on an exhibition at Photoville to reach so many people. So you'll see this unbelievable exhibition under the Brooklyn Bridge on Pier 1, and so many people, and I mean likely 100,000 people so far, because it's in a prime spot, has seen this since we've installed it. And as a Lebanese woman who grew up in Australia, many of these stories I can empathize with. And I feel that so many others, not just Asian Americans, can empathize with it also. So I'm so honored to have Haruka here with many of the folks who are featured in the story to talk about their experiences. So thank you.
Thank you so much for the warm introduction, Laura. Welcome everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Haruka Sakaguchi, and I'm a Japanese documentary photographer based in New York City. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss Asian Americans on race and the pandemic, a project I worked on this year with Time photo editor Sangsuk Sylvia Kang and reporter Anna Perna Kampampati, which addressed pandemic-fueled racism against Asian Americans. When Sylvia and I began this project in May, coverage of racism against Asian Americans largely fell into 2 categories. 1, long-form anecdotes by Asian American writers and public figures, or 2, anonymous reports via aggregated maps and local news coverage where only the perpetrator was identified. You know, the former provided textured insight into the psychological impact of these racial aggressions, but they lacked information about the scale or the ubiquity of these incidents. The latter provided these quantifiable data about the scale and location of these incidents, but they revealed little to no information about the victims and their humanity. So we wanted to develop a visual story that covered both the depth and the breadth of this issue. We decided we wanted to make portraits of everyday Asian Americans who were experiencing this kind of harassment or assault, and remember the sites where they occurred, many of which are familiar scenes for New York City residents like neighborhood blocks or the MTA. And we hoped it would create room for viewers to immerse themselves into the situation, while simultaneously placing the victim, not the perpetrator, at the center of the conversation. Each of these portraits taken over FaceTime are accompanied by the individual's handwriting and have been laid atop photos of the sites. Ultimately, we hope to capture these incidents in a way that redefines the individual from a victim to a survivor, and in a way that reimagines the location from a site of victimization to a site of resistance. 3 months since the project has been published, Black Lives Matter activists continue to protest police brutality all around the US, and pandemic-fueled racism against Asian Americans continues to occur. In light of that, we believed that it would be valuable for Photoville audiences to hear from some of the individuals who dedicated their time and energy to participate in telling the story, to see the portraits come to life by hearing their reflections through their own voices, and engage deeper with the ongoing issue of racism against communities of color in America. So we're incredibly excited to invite some of the individuals who dedicated their time to participate in this project and share their stories with us. Please meet Reg Ju, Hannah Hwang, and Ida Chen. So I'd love to start out with a question to everyone. Being targeted, especially in public, can lead to shame and humiliation. You know, I, for one, didn't tell anyone about my experience until many, many weeks after the incident. For anyone who faced hesitation before coming forward, what made you want to overcome that? What made you open to the idea of not only being seen, but also being photographed, right? While speaking up about racism against Asian Americans during this time? Reg, you encountered a man who said, I was gonna put my mask on if you were Chinese. You know, what made you open to coming forward with your story?
Yes, something that wasn't in the article that I mentioned, you know, to Sylvia was that these incidents of like overt racist things that are said in the street, these are things I've experienced before, you know, being in New York over 10 years, just from other strangers. But the reason why I thought this enraged me was because of the timing, meaning like, I knew to some extent that I was bracing myself for either myself or me witnessing incidents of like racist, COVID-related racist things once, you know, New York City opened up. But I didn't know that it would happen so quickly, meaning the incident that I experienced happened like probably sometime in April when, you know, back then, like I'm saying back then, but it was only like 6 months ago. New York City was shut down. Like, you know, we weren't even phase one. This is when like people are dying by the hundreds or thousands. And so for me to experience this during this heightened state, and I was just like, are you freaking kidding me? Like, I mean, I expected this to happen probably by the summertime when everyone's out and about, but for this to happen so close to my neighborhood and like so early, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And I think also it's just also timing. I know Sylvia and there was a posting about it, and I wasn't even gonna mention it to friends. It was just like another like racist shit that I just experienced, right? But I think it was also timing and the opportunity. So, all of those were the reasons why it just culminated into this sort of like story sharing.
We're really grateful that you came forward with your story, Reg. I know, Hannah, also you encountered a customer at your workplace who said something to the effect of, "You're Chinese, please get me somebody else to work with." And being targeted at your workplace, you know, comes with a unique set of challenges, to say the least. What made you want to come forward with your story?
As an essential worker, I was already experiencing anxiety and dread just going into work every day. But I think the hardest part about that was contextualizing my situation with, let's say, other essential workers. And so incidents and experiences that I had amidst the peak was definitely something that I had just, you know, forgot about the second I left work and the second I entered home. It was really easy for me to just push aside and say that's work-related incidents. And I think when I did see Haruka's posting on Instagram to ask if there are Asian Americans in our neighborhood that have experienced incidents in light of COVID, it was a really cathartic moment when I initially reached out to her via email. I just word vomited everything that I've been feeling, and it truly was the first time that I was able to reflect and understand that what's going on is not okay. I took this as an opportunity to reclaim my narrative and my story, and to be in camaraderie with members of my Asian American community. So thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I'd love to get, further into the discussion about the kind of social and cultural disincentives that, that many Asian Americans feel about talking about our own experiences, right? Which is why, it's very cathartic for me to be connecting with all of you as well, because, we don't really, well, some of us don't really have the opportunity to discuss this with family members or other friends of ours. So again, thank you both for coming forward. And Ida, I know you had mentioned in your story that you encountered a man who said something to the effect of, famously, I'd be into you if you didn't carry the virus. And I think many Asian women can relate to your story, if not in the context of the pandemic, in terms of fetishization and unsolicited remarks from strangers. What made you want to come forward with your story?
Well, I was always taught to kind of be, by my parents to stay quiet and don't speak up, because you never know if someone can come back and hurt you or whatever. And so it's better to just fly under the radar and pretend it didn't happen. But as a rebellious child, I was growing up, and I guess still am. I never really listened to that. I speak my mind when I want, of course, in appropriate settings. And I don't know if it was just maybe just because of that event, or maybe I was just sick of all the 24 years of microaggressions that, I have endured as an Asian American woman, or maybe I was just going crazy from the COVID quarantine, who knows. But when you reached out, I was like, this is a good moment to really take all this frustration I have and help educate America and the world of what's going on, not just now with a COVID pandemic affecting Asian Americans now, but just everything that has been ignored and under the radar for generations.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk about family for a second. We've all kind of touched on the type of hesitations that we had encountered initially, and I feel like some of that may have to do with our family environments. I'm curious, what were your family's reactions, if any of you had shared this incident with family members? Have any of you talked about your incidents with an older or a younger relative?
I definitely didn't hesitate to reach out to my parents in regards to this. I think something to note is, I don't want to generalize, but I feel like relationships with immigrant parents can be really nuanced in terms of generational differences and just overall different experiences, and contextualizing what maybe they had to go through versus maybe their children. And so I've grown up witnessing people saying horrible things to my dad on the streets. I distinctly remember the first time that happened. That happened to me when I was in college and he was dropping me off for the first time. And it almost makes me wonder, is that just the rite of passage of what they had to deal with when they came to this country? I think that came out a little bit when I spoke to them in regards to this. It almost came from a place of, but it happens. I've dealt, everyone goes through this. It's almost like they've experienced their fair share, and not by any means that now it's my turn, but they understand that this is just what it consists of, just living where we are and just this day and age. I think they almost see it as a compromise in living in this country. But that being said, there was nothing but support and understanding that if this is a narrative that I can make my own, I'll have their 100% support.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. The kind of difference and the dissonance that we've been talking about between first generation and second generation, how with first generation parents, sometimes there's a larger emphasis on survival over wellness, right? And sometimes that could serve as the dissonance in these conversations that we may have had. We may have experienced the same thing, but a second generation person may have interpreted it different than a first generation person.
also think that there's this level of shame associated with it as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
that when it happens to them, that's not something that maybe they see as like, I'm going to tell all my friends that this happened to me and I'm going to brag about it. I think an example that intertwines with this storyline is as my sister and I like graduated college as first generation college students. We were really boastful about that and nothing but prideful. And that was something that my parents really needed to grapple with. They were like, why are you proud that we didn't go to college? And I think that kind of resonated with this initially when it was like, yeah, you experienced something horrible, but why is this something that you're gonna like publicly talk about? But again, that shifted into just the support for me explaining how important it was.
So it sounds like you were able to get through and kind of come to not necessarily a consensus, but agree to disagree on
Great. Yeah.
Interesting. Ida, I know you mentioned in the article that we worked on together that older family members have told you not to involve yourself in black-white battles. Can you reflect on these conversations that you may have had with your family members?
Yeah, so I can break it down into like two parts. So the first part is like, their overall reaction of what happened to me. And then the second part about like their reaction to me speaking out publicly about this. So about the incident, the first thing was like, oh, like, are you okay? Like, why were you out alone? Like, what were you wearing? Kind of being like, what did you do to cause this man to say such things to you? And to be honest, like, it was broad daylight. And I told him, Mom, Dad, he said that just because of the color of my skin. And that's something I cannot change. And they're like, as long as you're not hurt, well, that's okay. But please be more aware. Like, they weren't really, saying, oh, there's something wrong with society. There's something wrong with like how people think it's okay to talk to other people like this. It was more like, oh, you should have known better. You should have prepared for this. But how was I supposed to prepare for that, right? And then the second thing was like how they reacted to me talking publicly about my incident. So at first they were like very repulsed by the idea. They were like, why would you speak about such sensitive things like this? It's something everyone goes through. Everyone goes through hardships. You're going to get kicked out of school. You're not going to be able to finish your medical education and all of that. And no one's going to want to hire you because of this. They were like kind of just freaking out about everything. And then after, the article got published and they know about the expo and this talk, they have a little bit more, understanding of like why I'm doing this. And I hope I make them proud. I hope they're watching this. But yeah, they didn't want me to get involved in like battle of the races, and essentially, which I do not agree with at all, because I think like as a minority group member, it is my responsibility to like, uphold and lift up other groups and, support each other.
Mm-hmm. And I remember you mentioning that in the last line of your story, and yeah, that really resonated with me as well. I have a question for all of you. How do you think your parents would have responded if they had encountered what you encountered? Let's start with you, Reg.
Oh, so my parents, until recently, they've had they own a small town, like sort of all general store in middle of nowhere, Oregon, which is all white people, small town, and so my mom particularly have experienced all kinds of racist comment that I'm just like, are you effing kidding me? Like, you're putting up with this? But so knowing that she just had to kind of like brush it off, if I told her this, she's like, oh yeah, those are stupid people, and she'll just like go off instead of like really deeply empathizing. And that's one of the reasons why I didn't really tell them that, and they still don't know that I experienced this, because like I said, I've experienced some level of this kind of incident, like racist stuff on the street before, several times. Maybe not COVID related, but other, just like people, just like random guys being like ching chong ching, like how that, and I'm like, what? So it to some extent, it's really sad that I've normalized it, and so did my parents. However, the difference is that I actually say something back to all those people who do say it. Whereas my mom she just laughs it off. She's like, ha ha ha, like, you know, people always be like, there's only one Chinese family and one, like my family was Korean family, and they're customers that always like mistake my mom as the Chinese woman across the street, and my mom thinks that's like funny, and to me I would be like irritated, but she just thinks it's the funniest thing in the world, and I'm like, okay, fine, like that's how you live your life, you know. So if that was my mom, she would have she wouldn't have blinked, like she just wouldn't have like whatever, like she just kept walking and wouldn't have thought about it, you know. And because for her, like you were saying, I think for a lot of immigrant parents, it's like just about survival. Like, are they able to still go to the job and make money? Like, unless these racist people are blocking them from doing those things, whatever, you know. And I think that speaks to their resilience, which I think often gets left out in these narratives. But it's also at the same time, I think we can hold multiple truths by holding the fact that they're resilient, but also it's a sad thing to deny or just overlook, right? So I have mixed feelings around it, but yeah.
And I love what you said about the multiple truths, because I think that's something that can be applied to, you know, a lot of the topics that we'll be discussing today, and a lot of, you know, communities, what they're going through right now. But yeah, I think especially what you said about, you know, maybe there's a larger emphasis on things like physical safety and being able to, you know, go to work and come home at the end of the day and take care of your loved ones. You know, like those priorities tend to take precedent, I can imagine. Ida, Hannah, did you have any thoughts? Did you have any ideas that you had?
So similar to Reg, like my family has a restaurant in the middle of Ohio. They're the only Chinese or even Asian family, like probably for 500 or so miles. And, you know, it's culturally isolating, I believe. And whenever I go visit them, people would say these like such rude, racist things that, you know, I have to really struggle to bite my tongue on, because I know this is their business. I can't jeopardize their relationship with their customers, you know? But my parents, they speak great English, but they don't really understand slang too much, I guess. It's a cultural thing. And when someone says, like what Reg says, like ching chong, whatever, that's what everything in Chinese sounds like. My dad just laughs and it goes over your head. And sometimes my mom gets like rude, like you know, degrading comments. And my mom kind of goes like, what? And just like continues on with her day. And, you know, I talked to them about this and they're like, oh, it's whatever. Like, we came to the US, we've been through worse. Like, we don't really care what people say at this point. But I think it also has to do with like, you know, with age, you grow to not care as much about other people's like words or what they think of you. And that also could be like an element that like differentiates like my reaction to like from their reaction.
Absolutely. I know, Hannah, it seems like you've had a lot of kind of in-depth conversations with your family about this. How do you think your parents would have reacted?
I think to like take a step back, I think the incident I chose to talk about was definitely like complicated in itself because it was in a work context. I'm customer facing, so there's just a level of professionalism and demeanor you have to hold at all moments. I think it's really hard to put aside that with experiences that one may face. And so to the question of how my parents would have responded, I definitely don't think they would have talked to like a major news publication about it post work. They probably just would have put it back into their heart and know that this is just what happens when you, one, are customer facing, and two, an Asian person living in America. It's that it's unprecedented and it's expected. So I think the fear of the consequences of coming out and then talking about their experience and their story would be something that would not be worth it to them.
Mm-hmm. think we all in this room, right, have made the cognizant decision to come forward with our stories. I guess I'm curious to know, was it helpful to be documented by someone who could empathize with your experience? I know, Hannah, you and I initially connected when I had posted a call on Instagram, right? Like you mentioned, after I shared details about my own incident. What inspired you to respond to the call?
Seeing that it was another fellow Asian American seeking out individuals that could also resonate with her. I think the whole experience was nothing but empowering for me. Even through the Zoom photo shoot, Haruka made me feel like a boss. Like I was doing poses that I thought probably looked so ridiculous, but that was just a moment for me to reclaim my story. Just the photo shoot in itself, it made me feel like a powerful woman of color, and I was unapologetic about the whole process. And so I think even the interview process, being able to speak to Anna, another Asian American, I knew that the narrative that she was like writing was going to be something that would only have the best interest in honestly both of us. And so the whole team working on this story and ultimately seeing all of your faces come together was something that I really appreciated. And I think I almost had a hunch that that was what this whole experience would be like when I initially reached out to Haruka. So nothing but grateful. Mm-hmm.
And I think the beauty of this is that we do have all of the, well, you know, some of the participants in the same room, and we're able to kind of share this dialogue. I'm curious to know, what was it like to read each other's stories? You know, what were your immediate reactions after seeing your stories published on Time Magazine in print format, right? And then seeing it in such a large format at Brooklyn Bridge Park. What were your initial reactions like? Reg, what were your thoughts?
I mean, I thought it was really great that the way this was exhibited was, you know, taking a shot of like where this happened, who we were, and what neighborhood, because I think it reminded me that racist shit is happening all over, no matter whether you're coming from like a rich neighborhood, a poor neighborhood, whatever neighborhood, like even in New York City, which is like considered one of the most liberal places in the world, like you're not immune to it, right? Like that whether people are doing it, they have a malice intent or just ignorant intent, purely just they don't know and they're saying stupid shit, that if you look like you're from China, you might be next, you know? I mean, this is COVID. Who knows if there's another virus that's coming from, I don't know, like somewhere in South America, like who's to say, you know, like, so I think it was really powerful to have our photos and the neighborhood and position ourselves in an area that didn't say, oh, these are only happening in Chinatown, right? Like this is happening all over the city. And by the way, the city that we're talking about is New York City. We're not talking about middle of Iowa. Mm-hmm. Then people, then America would be like, of course, yeah, Iowa, you would experience that. No, we're talking about New York City. And even within New York City, this is happening all across the board. So I thought, you know, like that was one of the things that I was like, oh, wow, okay. Like Queens, for example, I live in Queens, and Queens is like known as one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the world. Let alone, you know what I mean? And even then, like this was happening. So
yeah, and I think that was something that Sylvia and I talked about at length when we were trying to come up with the initial concept for this project, was how do we show the ubiquity? Because we're looking at these maps, and you know, the Asian advocacy groups had been coming up with these virtual maps recording the locations of these incidents, and there's really no pattern. There's no concentrating in one location. There's no, and in it, like you said, in a city like New York, where you are so defined by your neighborhood, it is very it's a very eye-opening experience to see all the neighborhoods and just seeing that they're all over this the city. So yeah, I am really curious, you know, how the incident, how everyone's incident has impacted your day-to-day life in the past few months. Rejwal, have you here? I know your work specifically is in the realm of anti-harassment training and witness intervention, right? How has your incident impacted your day-to-day life, do you think?
It definitely, like I teach self-defense classes. I also, teach martial art classes. I take Hapkido classes, and, I'm an instructor there. So it's not that I do overall feel safe, but I think this incident makes me second guess or just like double check something that's behind me, which was never a case before. So if I'm like on a scooter or something, like I'm always checking, or if I'm in the subway, I just want to make sure like who's in the, I'm checking people's eye, like how they're staring at me. And I'm just more defensive. And because I think I'm, like I said before, I'm bracing this like level of like, this is going to level up, as people feel more anxious, more fearful, more whatever, they're going to start blaming groups. That's how people who are stressed deal with stress is they start pointing things, right, when they're feeling pressured in whatever ways. And so I don't have this like sense of fear per se, but more this level of paranoia, if you will. Just double checking everything, which was never a case, yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know, Hannah, you had mentioned in the beginning that there's a part of you that was able to kind of compartmentalize between the workplace and home. But, what makes your situation different, I think, is that you do have to return to the same place where you experience the harassment on a day-to-day basis, right? I wonder how that's affected your day-to-day life.
I think being customer facing every day is different, and there are perks to that, of course, but you never know how the day is going to be, how it's going to pan out. Anyone can walk through the door at any moment, and the past few weeks, the past few months, of course, has been really difficult. And I think I do end up spending a lot more extra time contemplating if interactions I had with customers or just like any kind of dialogue was maybe racially fueled. Honestly, not even a conversation. I like twice in the past few months, I've gotten spit on at work, which honestly, besides the fact that that's a horrible thing to do in light of a pandemic as well, it left me, walking home thinking, was that racially fueled? Was that just something that happens because I'm customer facing? Is that just, again, expected? I think, well, that's a macroaggression. However, I think what ends up happening is with microaggressions as well, as people of color or any kind of minority, we spend a lot more time and energy just exhausting ourselves, asking yourself, like, was that this? And it doesn't need to be as something as physical as spitting. I have thought that with a neighbor of mine who recognized me with his young daughter. I'm friendly enough with them by now that they know my name, and the little girl kept calling me a different name as I was approaching her, and I kept looking behind me thinking she was thinking of somebody else, but she was actually referring to like another Asian woman that she knows and kept calling me by that name. And her father in that moment laughs it off and says, oh, you know how young kids are with Asian confusion. It's called Asian confusion. And I was on the phone with my mom at the time. And I honestly wasn't mad because I knew it came out of a little girl's mouth. I think I was just disappointed that was a moment of education that her dad could have used and spearheaded to be like, no, like, oh, so-and-so, this is not okay. This is Hannah. But I went home contemplating, what was that? What is it? And so I've honestly spent my whole life doing that. But if I were to say it was heightened, especially in moments where the interaction I talked about took place, I would definitely say it's tiring.
Mm-hmm. Tiring because, like you said, in that moment where it could have been a moment of education, that he then kind of looked at you and asked you to share the burden almost by being like, oh, well.
Right. And I'm still the one going home, spending that extra energy I have thinking about it. And it's not the person who did that action.
Absolutely. I know, Ida, in your situation as well, you know, it was you're not in customer service, so obviously it's not as street facing, but still you were out in a public space, and your encounter was completely unsolicited as well. Has this impacted your day-to-day life as well?
Well, in the beginning, like the first couple months of quarantine after that, I was definitely like hyper vigilant. You know, I had my blonde ombre hair. It was like a little longer, and I would wear a hat and big sunglasses. And of course I had my mask on. So, you know, I kind of try to blend in a bit and trying to follow my parents' advice, try not to be a target. And then like as more people came back to the city and the more busy it became, I kind of like, you know, became a little more comfortable. Like nothing that extreme has happened like since, but I still get like weird looks sometimes, or sometimes at the hospital when I'm working, like some patients will like be like, oh, I don't want to see you, I want to see like a different provider. And sometimes I wonder, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Asian? Is it because I look too young and like not experienced enough or something like that? So like Hannah said, it takes energy to like think these through. But yeah, of course, like my safety has been like very much of concern of mine, and I've taken extra precautions. I Uber more than I used to. I take the train less than I used to. And I finally got to a point like the past couple weeks where I felt like, okay, I can do more now. I feel better. But then after the debate on Tuesday, the presidential debate, and Trump used the term China plague, I was like, oh no, this is gonna happen all over again. So hopefully it doesn't happen all over again, but of course my caution will be, and my guard will be up.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us can attest to the fact that every time these comments are made, that means there's an entire generation of Asian children who are going to be teased. So yeah, I wish there was a bigger emphasis on the ripple effect here. Yeah, kind of writing on that note, it may be a bit of a theoretical, abstract question, but I wonder, reflecting on what's happened now, right? Has coming forward about your story changed your perception of the model minority myth? Again, this is a pretty lofty question, so I can start. You know, being an immigrant as opposed to a multi-generational American, I think I was a little slow on the uptake when it comes to truly understanding how the model minority myth can be used as this kind of racial wedge. You know, how it can be weaponized to shame and silence other communities of color. And I think this was because I considered myself an immigrant first, Asian American second. You know, I was kind of this invisible outsider with limited political power, or so I thought, right? So I felt, you know, it felt almost unthinkable that my presence here in this country would have a significant impact. But having experienced what I did in the wake of the ongoing Black Lives Matter movement has really reminded me that we're all active players in this country, you know, whether we want to believe it or not. And that we can only demonstrate cross-racial solidarity once we have fully acknowledged our own experiences, right? Our own participation in American culture. And also once we've learned not to discredit other people's pain, including our own. I wonder, has anyone else's perception of the model minority myth changed over time, especially after in the wake of the incident? You know, Ida, I remember in your conversations you were saying with your family members about Black-white battles, right? Has the topic of the model minority myth come up?
Yeah, it's like, so I talk to my parents about these topics pretty rarely, because I truly don't think they grasp it enough to like have a full conversation. But we've had these conversations a little more recently since the rise of like Black Lives Matter. And so my parents are aware that like there's a model minority myth associated with Asians in which, like, you know, Asians are stereotyped more to be more educated, to be smarter, better at math, harder working, all that. And my parents are always like, use that stereotype to your advantage and get ahead. But they don't understand, like you said, how it is used to weaponize other like minority group members. And I have this friend who I grew up with. She's Jamaican American, and we went to the same high school. We had like similar opportunities. And back when I was younger in high school, you know, we were in a very white suburban town in New Jersey. Like I was brainwashed to think, oh, everyone has equal opportunities, but I wasn't cognizant of the model minority myth yet, or the privilege I held because of this model minority myth. And so I was like, why can't you get as good grades as me? Why can't you go to college just like me? Because we had the same opportunity. And years after, like we've had this conversation and I apologized for my behavior. I was like, you know, I'm sorry. Like I wasn't aware of all this yet. I was foolish. And I hope you can take my apology, because I do not think like that at all right now, that I am ashamed of how I thought of any of the societal topic, and through college and educating myself, because I was a sociology major as well in college, and especially through Black Lives Matter movement, I've come to like fully understand this model minority myth and how like it affects other communities. And you know, it's ridiculous that, you know, people are still trying to hold it up on a pedestal and, you know, put Asians up there and, you know, continue to use that against other minority groups, because there are intelligent, smart people of any color, not just like one group. I know like tons of Asian Americans who are dumb, who are not hardworking. Like there's different types of people in every race. So I just don't understand why this is still like happening.
Mm-hmm. And I can definitely relate that it takes, oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Reg?
No, go ahead.
No, I actually did want to ask you, like you identify as a 1.5th generation, right? So you immigrated here into this country as a child and teenager. So I would be really curious to know, when did you become aware of the model minority myth?
So I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is predominantly white. I thought I was white. I played basketball in college, and I remember like playing basketball, like, you know, at different like places where it's like mostly white people. They would just do the whole like ching chong, like, or whatever, like, you know, stuff like that. That's when I realized, oh, I'm not like my white teammates. I'm different. But I think what I wanted to kind of piggyback on, you know, Ida's comments about model minority myth is that I think, you know, we don't think about how it's weaponized, meaning like we never question the oppressor and their intention of why we're complimenting Asian people, right? So kind of if we want to think about it in a family unit, right? So let's say you have a father, and a father in a family has more power than their child, right? If the father is strategically and intentionally complimenting one of the two kids because he has an intention to teach them a lesson about something, the child, instead of questioning the father of why are you doing it, or why are you complimenting in this way, often what happens is there's a lateral hostility that occurs between the siblings, right? And the siblings say, well, like, why, right? It's the back and forth of like, I'm working hard, you're not, and then there's an argument, blah, 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 rather than why aren't we challenging the person who's making up this rule, which is our white supremacist, like white ideology, white cis able-bodied heterosexual men that sort of like build these, you know, agreements or policies, right? That have been institutionalized for hundreds of years. It's not just like in the last couple of years. So why aren't we challenging that? And I think for immigrant communities, it's hard to challenge it because they're just in a survival mode. You know, from their home country, they probably suffered or have experienced their own set of oppression, and they don't have time for that shit, to be frank, right? But their children are experiencing the backlash of that. And I think that's where like my 1.5 generation, where I was, you know, I moved to this country as when I was 8, so mostly I was socialized in this country, but I still do remember bits and pieces of it back in South Korea. And so I have empathy for my parents and what they had to go through as immigrant parents who had to hold a lot of things. But at the same time, I think second or 1.5 generation, I think our role, our responsibility, our attention has to be different. It has to be around questioning. It has to be around challenging those ideologies or just like this model minority myth. Otherwise, we become victims. Like we become part of this like lateral hostility. Like we're going to be fighting with each other, whether it's other Black people, other Latino people, like, right? Like other Asian people, because there's also hostility within Asian API communities, right? So instead of challenging, why are they even complimenting us? Or why are they oppressing one group and not the other? Like we have to challenge those and question those, right? Because then we have a broader perspective of why this is happening, rather than just like, oh, the Asian people must be smarter, right? And just believing that whatever that myth is.
I really want to dig deeper into this, like the in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? How do you think, and Reg, while I have you here, how do you think your experiences change your perception of the Black Lives Matter movement and anti-Blackness within Asian communities?
I think this is an opportunity for us to educate our own communities, whether you're part of an API community, Asian Pacific Islander community, or Latino community, or like Native American communities. I think anti-Blackness exists in every community, right? There's colorism even in Asian community, right? I mean, I grew up with my mom like giving me shit about like getting tan because I'm gonna be darker, and like she gave birth to a light-skinned child. Why would you want to go and get dark? Like, so colorism and racist, like anti-Blackness exists in every community. And I think this is an opportunity for us to challenge our own families, our own relatives, our own community members, and tie that back to our own like histories of oppression, right? A lot of immigrant families and culture come from imperialism. I mean, imperialism exists everywhere around the world. And I think we can tap into our own history and draw parallels, and that could be more empowering rather than just being like, oh, that's something that happened here and I wasn't even here a few decades ago, right? Like I think my parents, for them, it's easy for them to be like, well, yeah, during civil rights I wasn't here because I was dealing with Korean War, and like my parents are fleeing from bombing. Like, so okay, great, then focus on that history and think about why US military was even based in Korea. Think about what are the connections of why US imperialism exists, not just in this country, but like everywhere, right? So I think this is an opportunity for all of us to tap into our own history and think about those linkage, and also therefore show solidarity. Because like I was saying earlier, coronavirus may have started in China, we don't know, but if it did, there might be another pandemic that's gonna happen in 20 years, and that might start in Chile or like Brazil, right? And we don't know who's next. So I think if anything, I learned that no one's safe, and we might as well just support each other at this point rather than point fingers.
I think that's very well said. Ida, it seems like you've had some kind of charged conversations with your family members as well. How do you think your experience had changed your perception of anti-Blackness within Asian American communities?
Well, I'm gonna like start with an anecdote. So like I grew up in a white town. I had my best friend, she's Jamaican American, like I said before. My parents have always really been against like me being friends with her just by the color of her skin. I remember like very vividly multiple times in middle school, like I would go over to her place to bake a cake for like whatever school event or something. And she and my brother would call the cops to like show up at their apartment to like bring me home, because, and their justification was like, oh, because like they're Black or Asian, who are the white cops going to listen to? Of course, the Asian people. And like I've always told them, you are wrong, that's not right. This is abuse of like social power and everything in between. Like her, and I remember I would hide behind a couch so like, you know, my friend and her mom wouldn't be like charged with kidnapping me, even though I was there willingly. So going back, like we talked about that recently, me and my parents. I was like, I think that's wrong. Like you shouldn't have done that. Like, you know, I do not support any of that to this day. And now that like you like my other friends who happen to be Black, like my parents met some of my college friends. One of them particularly, she's from Kenya. She was born there, raised there, and came to the US for school. And they loved her. So I was like, so are you going to drop the racial BS and like, you know, stop being so racist against Black people? Like no matter where they're from here or like from Jamaica, Kenya, anywhere. And my parents were like, that's something we should talk about. But like for now, like I'm still hesitant, like because, you know, on the news, Black people always cause these so-and-so crimes. And so we had to talk about that during the Black Lives Matter. I said, you know, like saying all Black people are so-and-so and bad, blah, 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 is the same as saying like all Chinese people have the virus. So like ponder that and please like try to create these parallels because it's not so different. It's not that abstract. And I think like slowly they're starting to like, you know, open up to it, think about it a little more. And, you know, little baby steps. They're not completely there yet, but I hope like in the future they can like be more open, especially with the pressure of, you know, all their friends and customers talking about Black Lives Matter and how like unjust like our Black minority group members here in the US are faced with such injustice. And they know that I'm part of the Social Justice and Anti-Racism Committee at my school, and also I'm part of the Journal Club against like societal inequalities at my school. So I told them, hey, I'm going to educate you as much as I can, and I hope you stick to it. But if you're not on the same boat as me, end of the day, like we are not going to be like eye to eye about this, and I'm not going to be happy with you, basically. And I think they're slowly starting to get it because it's something I take seriously.
Right. I think your story is a testament to, you know, how much needs to be done within our communities to, you know, come to this point of agreement. I think your story fits in beautifully with kind of the last discussion point that I wanted to bring up with you all. Now, what do you think Asian Americans, what are some ways that you think Asian Americans can demonstrate cross-racial solidarity during this time? And I know this is a very lofty question. And I had some thoughts of my own as well. You know, as mentioned before, right? I think fully acknowledging our own histories and experiences, kind of what Reg was referring to as well. I think that's a good start. For all of my life, up until working on this project, really, I rarely talked about my experience through the lens of an Asian American. And I never really discussed the microaggressions that I encountered on a regular basis, partly because of the shame attached to being targeted in such a humiliating but kind of low frequency way, right? But maybe also because of this like kind of deeply ingrained tendency to interpret these incidents as a testament to my kind of own shortcomings or my own inability to defend myself. And Ida, you had referred to this a little bit, you know, kind of talking about how you started to wearing your hair and that kind of thinking like, oh, is it something that I did? And you know, but I also can't deny that it had a lot to do with the fact that over the years, you know, I was also highly discouraged from talking about these issues. You know, it could be well-meaning family members who prioritize my physical safety and the big picture, so to speak, over rocking the boat, or others who suggested that my experience was far less remarkable. You know, it's only the tip of the iceberg compared to what Black and brown people in this country experience. And I think working on this project, I came to the realization that staying silent because our problems are perceived as not being as bad is yet another way to reinforce the model minority myth, right? This notion that systemic racism doesn't exist, because look, these people over here in this corner seem content and happy. You know, they're not complaining. You know, do we really have to wait for an acid attack or one of our elders to be set on fire to acknowledge that our lives too have been impacted by racism? And I think we Asian Americans can challenge the model minority myth by, like what you two are doing, actively communicating with our family members and also actively acknowledging and defining our own experiences for ourselves in all its kind of multicultural and multi-generational complexity. Does anyone have any more thoughts on this? And I think, yeah. No, go ahead, Reg.
I was just going to say quickly that I think, you know, on top of what you just said, I think this is a moment that we can sort of hold on to the and, not a or, meaning we can hold stories and spaces for all the Black bodies that are being killed or being harassed or being beat, right, in various ways, in institutions or in public, right, and not or, and we could also acknowledge that these are happening in our communities. That I think when we can hold various human experiences, a diverse range of human experiences, I think that allows people to look at the oppressor or the systems in which people are suffering from, rather than those individuals who are experiencing it. Because I think what I'm hearing, some of the, you know, thing that some of the panelists have said was like, there's a lot of victim blaming elements to it. And I think one of the core thing about victim blaming is that the attention is only on the person who's suffering from whatever the violence is, rather than the attention going on to the person who's actually doing these acts of violence. And so I think when we can provide multiple experiences, and whether that's, you know, right, and certain times, yes, we want to center Black voices and narratives, right? But I also think that that's not an excuse, or that's not a reason to silence our experience as well, because this is all tied to this more, a larger system of oppressive things that exist, right, and continue to exist. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that.
No, absolutely. And I think it ties into, again, what you were saying about being able to acknowledge multiple truths. I think that's a very challenging thing, but a very important thing for especially Asian Americans to consider. I know, Hannah, you mentioned in the article that we worked on together that after your experience, you know, you pivoted your mentality in acknowledging your own privilege and recognizing the critical role Asian Americans play, especially in the context of standing in solidarity with the Black community. What do you think is the critical role that we Asian Americans can play right now?
I think it's us not enabling that said stereotype we just talked about, being that silent minority, that model minority. That trope needs to just be proven against. I think that complacency will only continue to perpetuate xenophobia amongst our community, but amongst other communities as well. This pandemic-fueled racism is a novel rhetoric, however, or novel, but just racist rhetoric in general is not. And the momentum that COVID-related racially fueled incidents currently have, I think, segued into into George Floyd's killing. And it was a moment for me as a New Yorker to reflect and see that those streets where photos were taken of all of our incidents are the same exact streets that just weeks later thousands of New Yorkers are marching on. And so I think it was a humbling experience that those two really critical narratives were able to be weaved into the whole article in itself. You all didn't hesitate to know that that was a really important part for us to mention. I don't have a doubt that the question of how can we be better allies to the Black and African American community question would have come up. I don't have a doubt about that. However, I definitely think it was enhanced and more nuanced and just more emphasized with how we can stand in solidarity and not be that silent minority that can be perpetuated.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you all coming forward and tackling these very tough questions, especially as we're all still kind of processing what our own incidents as well. I'd like to end this conversation with a question to my photo editor, actually, Sylvia. I know this project for me has felt like a true collaboration between photographer and editor. Sylvia and I began conceptualizing this project in April, and the story was published at the end of June. So during this time period, we communicated via probably every communication method possible, over many texts and emails and spreadsheets. And we're brainstorming ways to visualize this project and also finding other Asian Americans who are willing to come forward with their stories, which was definitely not an easy feat. Sylvia, what were some of your considerations when producing this story?
Hi, everyone, and thank you for all being here. So I was looking back at our messages back in April, and when we first started conceptualizing the project together, I remember I had said, hey, I've been hearing so much about COVID-related racism against Asians. Have you been hearing about this? And you said some of your friends had experienced it as well as yourself. So I was like, okay, this isn't just me. It's not my algorithms. And we began digging deeper and preparing a pitch, and quickly learned that this was happening to many, many others. One thing that I wanted from the get-go was a collaborative approach to the story. I had just been a freelance photographer and worked with editors from whom sometimes I'd wished for a little more communication, direction, or sometimes just kind of understand how things were going to shape out to be. So you and I know we communicated constantly, and I apologize. We were sharing all sorts of things, and we shared, community aggregated maps, which were picking up at the time of anti-Asian assaults like I Am Not a Virus, Crimes Against Asians, Stop AAPI Hate. And we were always trying to keep a range of experiences in mind because racism and harassment against the Asian community comes in so many forms, as we all know. Another consideration that I wanted, that I had was that I wanted this project to be one that maintained the dignity of each participant. We really wanted to remember and document that these things were happening to these individuals without portraying anyone in a way that was typical of a victim portrait or of a crime scene photograph. And rather try to tell this story with a degree of respect that we all felt you deserved. I also felt that seeing your names written in your own handwriting would signify a sense of, agency, but at the same time, the identity that it's a person amongst us. And through working on this story, I learned that, from an idea to become an actual story in print and then, into an exhibition, the issue, must be timely. And I think this was something that was very much happening. It was a prevalent issue, and which unfortunately continues. Pandemic fueled racism against Asians and such rhetoric that reflects that attitude. And I think the story idea, we demonstrated at the time that there was, a huge need to capture it in a way that we did. At the time, official tallies weren't capturing the magnitude of what was happening, and it had prompted these community organizations to collect such data. So we wanted the story to be visual driven, but at the same time revolving around real life personal accounts of individuals and have it be from their standpoint. And then of course, we were hoping for an impact that could give face and validation to a community that feels perhaps less visible or less welcome during this time. So I think those were some of the considerations I had when we were putting this project together and all throughout the process and reaching out to you guys too.
Yeah, I agree. I think we both understood early on that this had to be a visually immersive story, you know, that the images really had to stand on their own. And I'd also like to add, from a photographer's perspective, you know, having an editor who was open to collaboration in the truest sense of the word, right? It really added to the catharsis behind this project. And we were touching on it a little bit before this conversation as well, the panelists as well. But, you know, like I mentioned before, for me, you know, I spent a good part of my life not really acknowledging my Asian American identity. And I think I gravitated more toward labels like Japanese or immigrant or minority because the term Asian American felt way too broad geographically, yet arbitrarily specific in a political sense, if that makes any sense. You know, it does lump 49 countries into a single word after all. So, you know, the term Asian American, as we know, was coined in the 60s as a kind of political banner to mobilize Asian immigrants. But to me, it kind of also serves as a reminder that in order to be seen in this country, we have to negate our cultural backgrounds and kind of racialize ourselves. Like that's how our predecessors reclaimed our citizenship and made us visible in this country, right? And because America always sees race before culture, you know, identifying as Asian American also meant that I needed to confront the politics behind the model minority stereotype and my own complicity in this kind of systemic racism. So all of this is to say that working on this project really felt like I was able to kind of revisit my Asian American identity. You know, on the one hand, I was able to acknowledge the kind of general alienation that I felt as a child growing up in the US, these small moments like we all shared today of name calling, being told to go back to China and being targeted, that I was so used to shoving down deep inside because they weren't as bad compared to what other groups were going through. These moments kind of came to the fore. And I was finally able to acknowledge that these are my truths and they deserve to take up space. But on the other hand, it's also served as this reminder that I can no longer sit on the sidelines as this immigrant or as the self-proclaimed outsider, right? As I've kind of done before, you know, it helped me realize that as long as I live in this country that epitomizes race over country, right, over culture, as long as I live in a country that kind of weaponizes my race to silence other communities, I'll have to confront the racial implications of my being here in this country. And that I also have a social responsibility to use my own skill sets to challenge the model minority myth and to work with others towards solidarity across communities of color. Yeah, also worth noting is that this is the first project that I've been able to work on with an Asian American editor on an Asian American issue. But to be honest, you know, I thought it would take decades into my career for this type of collaboration to happen. Maybe because I've become kind of so used to seeing Asian American issues being covered by non-Asian American journalists and photographers that, no, I figured I'd either have to be extremely lucky or I'd have to come up with a damn good pitch to be able to partake in this kind of collaboration. So I'm really happy that we all were able to come together and make this project happen. And I also hope that this project kind of becomes one of the many, many brilliant POC-led projects that inspire an industry standard of story ownership and reinforce this idea that we should be the ones telling our own stories. I think that's all the time we have today. I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately. I just wanted to kind of just to clean this up. We touched on this a little bit, but in closing, I'd like to clarify why we use the term Asian American for this project. The racial aggressions portrayed in this project, they primarily affected the East Asian community, and that's something that we wanted to notify, largely due to the Kung flu and the Chinese virus references by Trump. We've chosen to use the term Asian American because of many of the topics that we've discussed today, you know, the model minority myth, anti-Blackness, and the need for cross-racial and cross-cultural solidarity. It encompasses all Asian Americans. And while we recognize that the term Asian American doesn't capture the vast diversity of the communities that make up its entirety, we also believe that it's historically and politically significant term that was obviously crucial to the mobilization of immigrants from Asian countries in the 60s, but it still holds some relevance today. So we wanted to clear that up. If there are any audience members out there who have further questions, please feel free to email me or Sylvia, and we'd be happy to address them. I'd love to thank everyone who showed up to this panel, to the panelists, first of all, who dedicated their time and energy to share their stories with us, to Photoville, who offered us this platform to really make this project come to life. To my editors at Time, who fought for this incredibly nuanced and this culturally sensitive story to be seen by such a vast and mainstream audience, and to all of you who showed up tonight on a weekend, no less, to engage with this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honestly, this is one of the best conversations that we've ever had, and I want to thank all of you, and Ida and Raj and Hannah, your honesty and vulnerability of, I think, so I'm reading some of the chats and we're getting private chats. I think this is kind of quite cathartic in some way to have this conversation. And I think this is just the beginning. And quite a lot of people have been asking us if we're recording this because they felt, and I agree that usually the people who should be part of this conversation or should listen to it aren't the ones who seek it out. So yes, we are recording this. We will be making this available for people to access. So thank you to our partners at PhotoWings in order to make sure that it is available. I really do think this is going to be a really great educational tool, and it's just the beginning. So I want to thank everyone for joining us. Sylvia, you are such a rock star, amazing. Haruka, you know how I feel. And I've said this before, but I do feel Haruka is one of the most smartest creatives. She's like, but it's true. And I really do thank you all for joining us. I posted a link to the actual feature in Time Magazine. Encourage, if you haven't read it, you should definitely do that. If you're in New York City, come down to Brooklyn Bridge Park. It's up till November 29. There is really something to see it like out there, especially in New York City. And we hope that you all take care of yourselves, be good to each other, have a wonderful Saturday evening, and goodbye. Be well.